I'm here with Paige Olson, the creative play expert, and we're in the middle of this series discussing why libraries are so relevant in modern society. Now, one of the things that we want to discuss in this video is sort of a little bit more on the nuts and bolts of actually how, when you take your children to the library, how do you engage with the library? I mean, just on a very practical sort of level when you walk in the door.
Well, going to the library starts at home, getting into the car, just engaging that excitement of what kinds of things do they want to look for, returning the books, who's going to return them and where are you going to return them, and what's getting returned and what do you want to check out again and what do you want to remember. So there was always this excitement in the air when we went to the library. And the other thing that's really important when you plan on a library trip is you plan when you have time. Time because the library's not closing. Time because you're not rushing in and rushing out because of constraints that you and your family have because you have to get somewhere. The child needs time to engage, time to decide if this is a book to take home, this is a book to look at in the library. So it's time. And then we always, and this is because of who we are, and different people are different, they knew the layout of the library. They knew they needed to walk. They knew they needed to, we talked about etiquette, be quiet. And then they would go to their favorite section first. And it was always the nonfiction section. That's what my kids love. That's what we love to do. We would go to all the sections. And there are other sections we'll talk about in a minute. But they'd go to the section, and they usually would go to the place that they knew were the books they loved the best, whether it was firefighting or animal vet or whatever. And that's where and it's okay. Let them start in their favorite place first. And then what you do is you go and you start finding books because you've been paying attention to your child. You've been watching how they've engaged in the other types of play and the other things they've done. And you start pulling books along those lines. You say, hey guys, look what I found. So that you can draw them into other areas. Or you find an area that they've never seen before and you go, hey guys, look at this. Anybody interested in XYZ? So they start in a place, you start in a different place. And there are days where my little kids, and we were doing this when my kids were 18 months old, 2 years old, and on up. And if they were really tired, they could just sit there on the floor, lie on the floor, I didn't care. Or sometimes they'd go find that comfy chair to curl up in. And I would just bring them books. I would feed them books.
So this is interesting because when we think of books, when we think of the library, typically we think of reading.
Right.
But you advocate having your children start to interact with books long before they are capable of reading even.
Engage with the pictures. First of all, my son's profound encoding challenges, he didn't read till he was 14. But he loved books, loved what they brought, because in the pictures and in the little, we could read just the titles of the pictures and stuff, he learned and he engaged. That's how his brain worked. And that's okay, because he learned he was intelligent, he still had information to take home and engage with. And I would read him the books, but you can engage in a book without being able to read, and you need to watch. Each person engages individually, and that needs to be embraced as well. So absolutely.
One of the things that I noticed you've pointed out a couple of times already, and that is that when you take your children to the library, you don't simply quote-unquote drop them off.
No.
And you, as a parent, you are not there so that you can go do your research and they can do their research. Rather, your job is to sort of oversee, watch them, pay attention to what they're doing, and facilitate them. But the point is, it's not just a time killer for you.
Right.
You're actually there engaged in an activity, quite different activity than your children are engaged in.
Right.
You're watching your children and learning about your children, whereas your children are trying to learn about themselves. And I think that that's a very important distinction to make.
Then the other thing, too, at the library, you also want to make sure that they don't get stuck in just one section.
Yeah.
And so it's also my job to help facilitate the movement around the library. Nonfiction, yes, probably in our case most of the time. And other people, it's going to be the fiction or it's going to be the video. But it's to part of being there is to expand their knowledge and expand their understanding. And a few ways we did that is I made sure that I would draw their attention to the fiction section for a while, and I would go look for books that might be helpful. We would spend some time and find books on tape. I think it's really important that they hear other people's voices of really good people reading to them, to hear the language.
Mm-hmm.
Very important. So we found some great books and videos. There's some great fun videos that teach great lessons without knowing you're learning. They started to learn about the reference section and why you can't check books out there. So again, that took longer periods of time to be at the library, because if they found a reference book they really liked, they knew they couldn't check it out. And the last key to the library is the librarian. Let's not forget the librarian. I would direct my kids, if they had a question, to go ask the librarian rather than trying to come up with the answer myself, or rather than trying to figure that out myself, or even if I knew the answer, I'd say, go ask.
Yeah, that's great. I think that is one of those things that we don't think about very often.
Right.
There are people in our society who have spent their lives learning about libraries and how they work, and about how we figured out how to structure organizing information and how to go about finding it. And that's one of those really, what that allows is, in a safe, semi-structured environment,
Right.
a child is then encouraged, because they have a question, a legitimate question of their own, they're encouraged to go look for an outside expert. They're not
Right.
always coming to mommy and daddy.
Right.
They are now starting to interact with the adults around them who are experts in their field, and so now the child learns how to reach out to other experts. And the other thing I'd like you to touch on just briefly, which is one of those things that I think that when you look at the world from a child's perspective,
Right.
a child is pretty much, things are provided for them.
Right.
Their food, where they live and sleep and all these things. They are not responsible for very much in their lives. One of the few places that they take responsibility, one of the few places where their name is recorded as having responsibility for something, is when they check a book out from the library.
Right, and different libraries have different rules as to how young a child is before they can have a library card. But I'd like to go back and touch on one thing quick before I go into that, and that is the other neat thing about my kids talking to the librarian is so few kids do it, that the kids that do, the librarians get to know.
Okay.
And so sometimes my kids would come in and they go, "Hey, Willis," or "Hey, Heather, we just got this book in and I thought of you. And come here, I want to show you. I think it's still checked in," or whatever. Those librarians know what books are in the library. And if you give them the privilege of getting to know you as a child, they take an interest in you, and doors open into things where now they're reaching out to you and saying, "Hey, this thing just came in and I thought you might enjoy this." And so that's really cool, because they get this feedback of, wow, somebody thinks something of me or is paying attention to me besides mom and dad, in a very positive thing. And the other,
That's great.
so going back to the library card, it's the same thing. You know, if you check out a book and there's writing in it, or you check out a book and you accidentally rip it, or you check out a book and you return it late. First of all, there's the responsibility, but it's inevitable. If you checked out as many books as we did, and it was usually about 50 books the time we went in, and we kept track of them. We had a system at home that, you know, and so responsibility and everything. But sometimes it's inevitable a page will get torn, and one time one did. Instead of hiding it, and sometimes my kids would find, they'd open a book and it'd be a torn page, and they would take it to the librarian and say, "Look what I found." "Oh, thank you so much for telling me. I really appreciate you letting me know." You know, they took that book in, and before we returned it, they went and they showed it, and they said, "We're so sorry that this happened, and we don't know what to do about it, but we're responsible for this." And the feedback was so positive. The library, the personnel was so appreciative that these children would actually take the ownership of, "We've damaged something that didn't belong to us, and we are so sorry." what can we do? And in that case, it's, well, we'll just tape it back together, but thank you for letting us know. So many people return books and they don't have they don't take the responsibility to let us know. We so appreciate it. And so they left with a positive, skipping to get more books because they weren't punished for it. They were appreciated for being honest. And so, you know, and when a book was returned late, we would talk about, you know, there's a cost. And even they played library at home and they'd set up, you know, the cash register in case somebody returned a book late, and they would copy what was happening in the library. It's become so automated, some of that personal stuff is gone, but there are still people there. And so taking those steps to teach those lessons and the interpersonal relationships really matters.